This is Remy.
I'm a rat.
He's the main character of a movie I hold very near and dear to my heart.
It sounds like rat and patootie.
In fact, I'd easily put it in my top 10 Pixar films. But even so, Remy has one major problem.
What's my problem?
His character arc is kind of bad. Now, character arcs are important in any movie, but Pixar films in particular are basically defined by their character arcs. Almost all of their narratives see one or more characters learn an important lesson and change in deeply meaningful ways. In Toy Story, Woody learns that new relationships don't have to take away from pre-existing ones. In Cars, Lightning McQueen learns that there's a lot more to life than winning when you slow down to appreciate it. And in The Incredibles, which is also written by Brad Bird, the Parr family learns to stop hiding what makes them special and instead embrace it. So then what lesson does Remy learn over the course of Ratatouille? The easy answer is that anyone can cook, right? After all, Chef Gusteau's motto is repeated constantly throughout the movie.
Anyone can cook.
Anyone can cook.
Anyone can cook.
Well, I would argue that even though this is a major theme of the movie, it's not a lesson that Remy learns. In fact, one of the only times it comes up around him is when he's actively disparaging Linguini.
Well, yeah, anyone can. That doesn't mean that anyone should.
Instead, there's actually 3 different lessons that Remy learns over the course of the runtime. First, that it's better to be your true self than to placate those around you. Second, that it's better to trust and work with humans than to fear them. And third, that stealing is wrong no matter what. Now, there's nothing inherently wrong with these lessons being the basis for a character arc, but the actual plot fails to effectively support these ideas, resulting in a screenplay with incredibly muddled messaging. So let's explore each of these 3 mini-arcs so we can figure out why Remy's character development is the single weakest element of Ratatouille and how we can fix it. First is Remy learning to be his true self, rather than pretending to be someone/something that he's not. This mainly gets explored via the conflict with Remy's father, Django.
The D is silent.
The thing Remy wants more than anything is to become a chef, but his father wants Remy to be nothing more than a rat.
Look at me. I'm not the rat.
In fact, Django hates the idea of Remy living on his own.
We're rats. We don't leave our nests.
And he actively shames Remy for having any goals in life.
Why is that? A shortage of food or a surplus of snobbery?
So, with regards to this specific subplot, Django is actually a perfectly designed antagonist. The problem, however, is that Remy's characterization doesn't gel with what the arc is going for. At no point is he really committed to winning his father's approval or pretending to fit in. He gladly walks around on 2 feet.
I don't want to constantly have to wash my paws.
He doesn't try to hide the fact that he can read.
Not excessively.
Oh, man. Does Dad know?
And he's clearly not afraid to speak out against his father.
We're thieves, Dad. And what we're stealing is, let's face it, garbage.
From the moment we meet Remy, he's already unafraid to live in his truth. He knows what he wants and isn't afraid to say so.
If you are what you eat, then I only want to eat the good stuff.
There are a few moments where he kind of starts to doubt himself, like when he gets separated from his family, or when he gets trapped in a cage.
So, we have given up.
But each time this happens, Gusteau just gives him a pep talk and immediately fixes the problem.
If you focus on what you've left behind, you will never be able to see what lies ahead.
The audience never believes that Remy might actually just give up and be a rat. And this means that there's very little difference from where he begins and where he ends, making this mini-arc feel more like a straight line. The one big moment of change, which is actually character regression, is when Linguini kicks out Remy for stealing.
And don't come back or I'll treat you the way restaurants are supposed to treat pests.
And Remy tells his father,
We are what we are. And we're rats.
Except this moment doesn't actually work because it's not earned. Why does Linguini getting mad at Remy make him give up on being anything more than a rat? Remy chose to steal from the kitchen specifically to spite Linguini, so it's not like Linguini kicking him out was unreasonable or even surprising. It's not the world being biased against rats, it's just the consequences of his own actions. I think a better low point for this arc would be if Remy tries to stop his family from stealing the food, but Linguini walks in and misunderstands understands the situation. If Linguini accused an innocent Remy of theft and then kicked him out of the restaurant, it would actually give Remy a reason to believe that the world isn't ready for a rat to become a chef. But instead, we just get a lackluster low point that feels incredibly forced. Likewise, the culmination of this mini-arc fails to land in the way that the filmmakers intended. Trapped in a cage and having given up hope, Remy explains to Gusteau,
I'm sick of pretending. I pretend to be a rat for my father. I pretend to be a human through Linguini.
and it's meant to be a really powerful moment, but once again, it's not earned. Up until 5 minutes ago, Remy never pretended to be a rat around Django, and even then, it was his choice, and he didn't seem like he was pretending. And regarding his comment about Linguini, when does the movie ever frame their interactions as Remy pretending to be human? From the moment Linguini realizes Remy can understand human speech,
You understand me?
their relationship is framed as a mutually beneficial partnership.
I can't cook, but you can. Okay, I'm gonna let you out now, but we're together on this, right?
The only time things get tense between the two of them is when Linguini starts a relationship with Colette, which Remy instigated, and when Linguini takes credit for Remy's cooking.
You want the truth? I am Gusteau's son.
Which was the entire premise of their partnership. Plus, even on a technical level, it's weird to refer to how Remy pilots Linguini as pretending to be human.
Whoa! That's strangely involuntary!
The Power Rangers aren't pretending to be a Megazord, they're piloting the Megazord to do something that they couldn't with their normal bodies. Even if you consider Remy hiding in Linguini's hat to be a form of pretending, he's still pretending at the end of the movie. Sure, he's free to walk around the kitchen as a rat, but he is keeping his identity a secret from the general public. I think what bums me out about this moment the most is that, out of context, it's an amazing scene. Having a character finally internalize a truth that they've secretly known all along is an awesome way to finish off a character arc.
You only tell me stuff I already know. I know who I am. Why do I need to pretend?
Hearing Remy triumphantly declare,
Because I'm a cook!
would be the perfect icing on the cake if there were actually a cake for the icing to go on. What the movie needed most was to spend more time developing Remy's inner conflict. We should have seen him be nervous to cook, or worried that his background as a rat makes him unworthy of following in Gusteau's footsteps. But instead, the movie focuses almost entirely on external conflicts. Will Remy be shot to death by an old woman? Will Remy be burnt alive? Will Remy be able to get the Jerry Springer results to Linguini? Sure, there are a few scenes where there's tension revolving around food, but it's almost always about physically getting the dish made, rather than whether or not it's actually good. If there was a scene like this,
Can you handle this? Is it too much for you? Answer me. I can handle it, chef.
then it would be much more satisfying when Remy finally declares himself a real chef. But because all we ever see is people loving Remy's food, it's hard to feel like he actually doubted himself at any point. It's great that Remy proves to Ego that Gusteau was right,
But a great artist can come from anywhere.
but the movie should have been focused on Remy proving this to himself.
But Chef Gusteau isn't the only one who believes that anyone can cook, which is why I want to talk to you about HelloFresh. For a long time, I found cooking new foods to be really intimidating. I never wanted to branch out because what if I made something wrong and wound up wasting the ingredients? But with HelloFresh, I actually look forward to spending time in the kitchen. Every meal kit comes with exactly the right amount of ingredients and a recipe card that will guide you through each step of the culinary process. They have over 50 dinner options, meaning you can constantly be learning new recipes and eating delicious food. Plus, I would be remiss not to recommend the Sweet Umami Pork Burger because I tried it in my last box and it was a whole new level of delicious. Something else I love about HelloFresh is that they really try to accommodate each individual person. Need a meal that's vegetarian, quick and easy, or maybe just family friendly? HelloFresh has options designed specifically for each of these. Need to change a delivery date or skip a week because you're out of town? HelloFresh has got you covered. Oh, and check this out. I was able to make peanut butter and cherry Belgian waffles because HelloFresh is offering a free breakfast item with every delivery. There's a reason HelloFresh is America's #1 meal kit. So if you want to become a better cook, eat delicious food, and support the channel, make sure you click the link in the description and use code BLOCKSEP10 to sign up for HelloFresh today.
Next, I want to examine how the movie explores the lesson that it's better to trust and work with humans than to fear them. Now, most of this mini-arc revolves around Remy's relationship with Linguini, but the conflict once again begins with Remy's dad. Django is the character who most directly argues that Remy shouldn't have any relationship with humans.
Stay out of the kitchen and away from the humans. It's dangerous.
Basically, he serves the same function as King Triton in The Little Mermaid. They both have children who show an interest in humans and their creations, they both dislike humans and warn their children to stay away, and they both eventually change their attitudes after seeing their children develop positive relationships with kind-hearted humans. However, unlike King Triton, Django is 100% correct to fear humanity. In the world of The Little Mermaid, there are a few humans that might try to hunt or harm mermaids, but for the most part, any harm inflicted upon merfolk is accidental. But in Ratatouille, there's a whole category of poison specifically designed to kill rats, and the vast majority of humans will kill any rat on sight. So Remy really should listen to his father.
I know I'm supposed to hate humans, but there's something about them.
Now, you might say the lesson isn't about trusting all humans, but rather just a select few. But then how do we explain this scene?
You're talking like a human.
Who are not as bad as you say.
Oh, yeah?
Remy doesn't say that they aren't all bad, but rather...
And they're, not so bad as you say they are.
Referring to humans overall, and not just Linguini, which is weird since every human that sees Remy besides Linguini tries to kill him. Later, to prove just how dangerous humans can be, Django takes Remy to see a shop window full of dead rats on display. First of all, this may be the single darkest thing to happen in a Pixar movie. According to the logic of this movie, every rat has the same sentience as an average human. Can you imagine if this same scenario was depicted but with human bodies? Like, I get that it's visually different, but emotionally, it should be the exact same thing. Secondly, when Django explains that
This is what happens when a rat gets a little too comfortable around humans.
he's not wrong, but Remy argues with him as if Django is a racist uncle at a Thanksgiving dinner.
You can't change nature.
Change is nature, Dad.
The conversation ends with Django asking,
Where are you going?
and Remy dramatically replying,
With luck, forward.
So this scene directly implies that the movie thinks Django is wrong and that Remy is correct. That fearing humans is a regressive and harmful ideology, and that rats should trust humans and integrate into their society. Which, fine. It's a wild thing for a movie to argue, but this movie's premise is already pretty wacky. However, the problem is that we don't really follow through on this message by the end of the movie. Look at what happens when Linguini reveals Remy to the kitchen staff. Everybody quits right then and there. And it's not because they don't believe him. Remy clearly demonstrates how he pilots Linguini, so when they leave the restaurant, it's because they refuse to work for a rat. Colette eventually comes back, and Ego ends up investing in Remy's new restaurant, but that's only 3 human beings in total that actually respect Remy. What's annoying is they could have avoided this issue if they just changed a few bits of dialogue. If Remy focused on the idea that not all humans were bad, citing people like Chef Gusteau and Linguini, his argument would feel much more reasonable. But as it stands, Remy feels overly idealistic, and the narrative doesn't even support his point of view. Also, Remy doesn't have to adapt to humanity all that much, which, once again, makes this mini-arc feel completely flat. From the very beginning of the movie, Remy seems to trust humans implicitly.
I know I'm supposed to hate humans, but there's something about them. They don't just survive, they discover, they create.
But I think it would be much more poignant if he started out afraid. He could be fascinated by cooking, but wonder how such a violent species could create such wonderful food. This would also make it a bigger deal when Linguini saves Remy. If Remy suddenly changed his opinion about people and slowly grew to trust Linguini, it would add a lot of depth to this aspect of the narrative. Also, speaking of saving Remy, this scene always bothers me. After Remy agrees to help Linguini if he sets him free, Remy immediately runs away and laughs at Linguini for being so naive. But I thought Remy liked humans. Doesn't this moment go against everything that the movie has been telling us about this character? Yeah, he turns around and goes back, but only because he pities Linguini. But regardless, this is where the two start working together, and I feel like their relationship is a bit of a missed opportunity. They briefly struggle to find an effective system for working together.
This is not gonna
gonna work, little chef. I'm gonna lose it if we do this anymore.
But this is a purely mechanical issue. If Remy and Linguini needed to trust one another in order to work effectively, it would truly flesh out the subplot about human-rat relations. But instead, Remy just takes complete control of Linguini's body. Linguini doesn't add anything meaningful to their partnership, and every time he tries to argue with Remy, the narrative frames the latter as being in the right. Suddenly, Linguini isn't even really a character. He doesn't have meaningful wants or needs, and he's just a vehicle for Remy to operate. He briefly tries to assert himself after the press interview.
Your opinion isn't the only one that matters here. Colette knows how to cook too, you know. Bow!
But this doesn't really have an impact later in the movie. Remy still bosses Colette around,
And just tell me what the rat wants to cook.
and Linguini just acts as a waiter without making any meaningful choices. Also, we never even explore how Linguini feels about being Gusteau's son, or why he actually wants to run the restaurant. He's supposed to be the secondary protagonist, but his character development is even more poorly handled than Remy's. Another change that might help develop this mini-arc is if Django was more involved in the Remy Linguini storyline. Remember when I compared Django to King Triton? Well, part of why Triton is such a good character is because his reactions help contextualize major moments in the story. When he finds out that Ariel is in love, he's happy. Then, when he finds out she's crushing on a human, he's furious. And finally, when he sees Eric defeat Ursula and save Ariel, he realizes he was wrong about humans. Django, on the other hand, feels completely sidelined throughout the narrative. We never see his reaction to Remy revealing their secret colony, and there's no meaningful consequence to Django learning about Remy's double life, which is weird, because he's the main guy saying not to interact with humans. Imagine if instead of destroying the statue of Eric, Triton was just like, "Hey, Ariel, I ain't gonna do nothing, but I'm very disappointed in you." It would feel narratively flaccid. On top of this, Django doesn't have a moment where he realizes he was wrong about humans. We get a beat where he accepts that his son is truly a chef.
We're not cooks, but we are family. You tell us what to do, and we'll get it done.
But nothing tells us why he's suddenly cool living around people. If the rest of the staff didn't quit, I feel like it would have been awesome to have the thumb guy help Django catch the health inspector, leading to an unspoken respect between man and rat. Oh, and jumping back to Remy real quick, the people who do come to accept him only do so because of his talent in the kitchen. They don't value him because he's a sentient creature, but rather because he possesses a valuable skill, which, in my opinion, is pretty problematic. Overall, human-rat relations is yet another subplot that kind of gets abandoned by the time we reach the finale. The final mini-arc Remy undergoes as a character is learning that stealing is wrong. Starting off on a positive note, the protagonist actually starts in the correct spot, given what this arc is trying to accomplish. When the movie opens, Remy seems pretty comfortable with the idea of theft.
If we're going to be thieves, why not steal the good stuff in the kitchen?
He doesn't see anything wrong with taking food from humans, he just wants the food they take to be tasty.
If no one wants it, why are we stealing it?
This puts Remy in a great position to eventually change his mind and learn that stealing is wrong over the course of the narrative. When Remy is first talking about humans, he explains,
They don't just survive, they discover, they create. I mean, just look at what they do with food.
And this concept eventually becomes the basis for why he feels a connection to humans over other rats.
All we do is take, Dad. I'm tired of taking. I want to make things.
Unlike the rest of his species, Remy wants to achieve more than just survival. He wants to share nutrients, ideas, and creativity with the world around him. As a result, the audience understands that in his pursuit of becoming a chef, Remy will most likely learn that stealing is wrong. This right here is a really great setup. It establishes the starting values of the character, it reveals a willingness to change, and it lays out a path towards personal growth. On top of this, the inciting incident further reinforces the idea that theft is wrong. After Remy and Emile get zapped by lightning, Remy decides that his new dish needs
saffron! A little saffron would make this!
But when they go to the kitchen to steal saffron, the old woman discovers them, leading to the exposure of the entire colony, and Remy becoming separated from his family. Whether or not you think what Remy is doing is wrong, the movie is clearly saying that stealing is bad, and that bad things happen when you steal. Later, Remy's spirit guide tells him,
You are better than that. A cook makes. A thief takes.
This not only supports the idea that Remy needs to stop stealing in order to become a chef, but also explicitly communicates that being a thief is a bad thing. And finally, when Remy uses stolen spices to make an omelet for Linguini, Linguini says,
Look, it's delicious, but don't steal.
Unfortunately, this is the last time where the movie's stance on theft remains coherent. Anytime Remy brings up the concept of theft, Django argues that what they're doing isn't stealing.
It isn't stealing if no one wants it.
But this is weird for a number of reasons. If we assume that the writers think that Django is wrong here, then why don't we get a scene where he realizes what they're doing is stealing, and therefore wrong? They make a point for him to redeem himself at the end, so why not include this as part of his redemption? Also, if the script is going to tell us that the defining traits of rats is that they steal things,
All we do is take, Dad.
why have the character meant to represent the traditional rat take issue with being called a thief? Secondly, if we assume that the writers think that Django is correct, then that directly conflicts with the messaging of the movie. Except for the Act 2 low point, no one ever takes enough food that the victim would be left wanting, let alone even notice. So, by the logic set forth in the movie, it shouldn't be considered stealing. But despite this, the human characters always refer to it as stealing, and the narrative frames it as a bad thing. Either way you interpret Django's argument, it's both underdeveloped and inconsistent with the rest of his characterization. Jumping back to Remy, let's look at how they write the character in Act 2. Because despite how well they set up the character for this subplot, the actual development is pretty lackluster. Just before the narrative's midpoint, Remy reunites with his brother Emile when he discovers him eating a piece of garbage outside of Gusteau's restaurant. Wanting his brother to try decent food, Remy goes back into the restaurant, only to be chastised by Gusteau.
Remy, you are stealing? You told Linguini he could trust you.
And he can.
Now, it's pretty normal for cooks to make food for people they know, and Remy is essentially an employee, but instead of pointing this out, Remy just says,
It's for my brother.
So does this mean Remy does consider this stealing and just doesn't care? Or is he saying that it's not really stealing and therefore not a big deal? A big problem with this whole subplot is that sometimes the movie is focused on whether or not stealing is wrong, and other times it's focused on what does or doesn't qualify as theft. Not only does this make the messaging needlessly complicated, but the movie doesn't seem to have a clear answer for either question by the end of the runtime. Speaking of which, about 20 minutes later, Emile comes back to the restaurant, this time with a bunch of other rats. However, unlike last time, Remy is reluctant to share food with others.
You told them? Emile, that's exactly what I said not to do.
Now, please correct me if I'm wrong, but after looking through the script and the movie, Remy never actually told Emile not to tell people about the restaurant, so this sudden reluctance feels really out of nowhere. Regardless, after being intimidated into stealing food for them, Remy is once again called out by Gusteau,
They want you to steal food?
and Remy once again brushes him off.
No, it's complicated.
But this time, it's a bit more interesting.
It's family. They don't have your ideals.
Like Django, Remy is now arguing that what he's doing isn't technically stealing. He's also arguing that stealing for the sake of a loved one isn't wrong.
My sister's child was close to death.
And that it's okay for rats to steal because they're not like humans. Oddly, these are legitimately compelling arguments. All the humans have incredibly black and white views on theft, but the rats live an incredibly different type of life. These rats aren't ever shown to cause harm to people, but people are constantly trying to do harm to them. Expecting these rats not to steal, if it even can be considered stealing, is like expecting wild carnivores not to kill. This is their only way of collecting food. Also, even if theft is morally the same for both species, the movie doesn't communicate its message effectively. In the same scene where we're supposed to judge Remy for theft, he winds up discovering Gusteau's will.
He's your son?
I have a son?
Which leads to Skinner being fired and Linguini taking over the restaurant. This is very much framed as a good thing by the narrative, and they even refer to it as happy changes in the screenplay, but none of this would have happened if it weren't for the very act this movie condemns. In a more complicated piece of cinema, this might be an interesting way to explore whether or not the ends justify the means. They could have even created a dilemma wherein Remy has to decide if telling Linguini is worth revealing how he came about the information. But the movie itself doesn't meaningfully address this nuance, making it feel like a contradiction rather than a complication. Finally, let's look at the Act 2 low point. As I mentioned previously, this is where Remy feels scorned by Linguini and decides to spite him by stealing from the restaurant. Now, even though this technically goes against his character development, that's pretty common in most screenplays. Not only is the end of Act 2 where the protagonist should face a major external setback, but it's also where we commonly see them revert to their old habits. In a movie like Up, this is where we see Carl push away the people he slowly opened his heart to during the past 60 minutes.
Bad dog! Bad dog!
But the problem with Ratatouille is that Remy doesn't ever apologize or admit that he was wrong. Sure, he returns to help Linguini, but he hasn't changed his stance on stealing. Then during the climax, they do a kidnapping, which is stealing a person instead of an object. So did the movie just abandon the lesson about stealing being wrong once we got to Act 3? Or is it all of a sudden saying that crime is justified depending on the circumstance? Either way, this mini arc winds up being the least comprehensible part of the narrative, which is extra disappointing considering how strongly they set it up back in Act 1. I think this arc could have been way better if they did two things. First, figure out what it is that you're actually trying to say. Is being a thief a bad thing? Or is it okay if something good happens because you stole? As my AP English teacher mom would say, any interpretation is valid just so long as you can support it properly. Secondly, if theft is going to be such a prominent part of Remy's character arc, then it also needs to be a bigger part of the story. One way to do this would be to say that Remy's recipes require hard to find ingredients. This way, Remy could feel like he has to steal in order to be a great cook. Linguini would reap the benefits of Remy's cooking without knowing what he's been up to, only to find out at the Act 2 low point and be furious. Then, when Remy comes back for the finale, the reason he makes Ratatouille is because
it's a peasant dish.
It would be a challenge for Remy to make a dish with such basic ingredients, but doing so would prove to Linguini that he's evolved as both a chef and a character. Plus, you'd get to see cute little food heists throughout the second act, which would be an easy way to integrate Remy's family into more of the narrative. Now, after discussing all these issues, it might sound like I think that Ratatouille is a bad film, but this couldn't be further from the truth. Do I think that the screenplay for Ratatouille is poorly written, at least from a thematic standpoint? Absolutely. But like Linguini's soup, enough good can make any product fantastic, which is why Ratatouille is Pixar's highly imperfect masterpiece. As a piece of art, it is undeniably more than the sum of its parts, and I would argue that this is due to some X factor or special je ne sais quoi, but actually, I do sais quoi. If I had to summarize what I love most about this movie in one word, it would be vibes. Aside from Cars and The Incredibles, no Pixar film even comes close to having as much style and unique identity as Ratatouille. The top-notch animation, the brilliant art direction, and the Parisian charm of it all wind up creating one of the coziest films in existence. While it might not be my favorite movie in Pixar's catalog, it's by far the easiest to rewatch, because every viewing feels like a warm hug. Or if you grew up in the 2000s, like being in a Chef Boyardee commercial. So, do I think that there are a lot of ways this narrative could have been improved? Of course. But do I really care? No. But you tell me, do you think movies can get by on vibes alone? And if so, which ones do it the best? I'm Dylan, and this has been The Writer's Block.